very distinguished and talented fiction writers here in Listowel to read for us this afternoon. And as a member of the Listowel Writers' Week Committee, I'm very, very happy and honoured to welcome them both. They are Danielle McLaughlin and Anthony Glavin. I'm going to introduce them both now, and then they will read each. I think Danielle is going to go first, and then Anthony. And then they very kindly agreed to take questions from the floor. So maybe you can think about some questions that you might like to ask. Now is your chance. Also, just a few housekeeping things, just to remind you. I'm sure you're sick of hearing them, but they are important nonetheless. Number one is the emergency fire exits. There's one here on my left and the door you came in. And also, please turn off your mobile phones or at least silence them. Thank you so much. Anthony Glavin is the author of the acclaimed novel Nighthawk Alley, and his second novel, Colours Other Than Blue, came out this year. He's also written 2 short story collections, One for Sorrow and The Draftsman and the Unicorn. Danielle McLaughlin first appeared at the Listowel Writers' Week as part of our new Writers' Salon in 2014, and she comes to us fresh from winning the Saboteur Award for Best Short Story Collection for her debut story collection, The Stinging Fly Press, Dinosaurs on Other Planets. And stories have been published in the Irish Times and the New Yorker. And we are absolutely delighted to have them both here to read for us, starting off with Danielle McLaughlin. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Victoria. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really lovely to be reading here in Listowel today, and my thanks to the Writers' Week Committee for inviting me. I'm going to read a short story called Those That I Fight, I Do Not Hate. Ranelagh on a summer Saturday. The pavements scattered with blossoms, the air pulsating with the rhythmic thrum of lawnmowers. Kevin stood at the window of the Miller's living room, watching a dozen or so little girls pose for photos in the front garden. His own daughter was among them, her blonde curls straightened and pinned in a plait, so that at first, in the midst of so many other plaited heads, he hardly recognised her. The Millers lived in a Victorian red brick near the church, and Fiona Miller had insisted on the party. It was no trouble, she told anyone who attempted to cry off. It would be a treat for the children, and she and Bob were happy to host it, knowing as they did that not everyone was as fortunate as themselves. The girls shrieked and giggled, buzzing with sugar and summer, and then, remembering themselves, they smoothed the skirts of their white dresses and raised small, careful hands to adjust veils and tiaras. Lovely, aren't they? Kevin said, turning to the woman behind the drinks table. The woman frowned. She wasn't the caterer, but one of Fiona Miller's friends, perhaps even one of her sisters, and this placed her firmly in the ranks of people who hated him. Great that the rains held off, he said, because she could hardly find that objectionable. But she began to move bottles around the table as if they were chess pieces, taking them by the necks, setting them down in their new positions with unmistakable hostility. Sun angled through the slatted blinds, igniting the glitter of cards on the mantelpiece, bouncing off the guns of Bob Miller's favourite model plane, a World War I Sopwith Camel displayed in a stand beside the door. Bob's great-grandfather had served in the London Irish Rifles, losing an arm at Fleur-Courcelette. His uniform and his cap with its badge of harp and crown was displayed in a large glass case at the end of the Miller's Hall. Also in the case were things belonging to other dead men bullets, armbands, and letters that Bob had purchased on the internet. Bob liked to joke that he'd been a military man in a previous life, though in this one he was senior actuary for an insurance company. Kevin turned again to the window. His wife was in the garden also, talking, he saw now, to the man who'd once been his boss. Earlier, he and the man had exchanged terse hellos in the hallway. He'd asked Kevin, and why did everyone feel obliged to ask if anything had turned up yet? And with that out of the way, had retreated to a suitable distance. Kevin watched the man rest a hand consolingly on his wife's arm, while she dabbed at her eyes with a hanky. He needed a drink. He'd hoped the woman at the table might have gone to join the others in the garden, but she remained at her post, arms folded across her chest. On his way out of the room, he touched a finger to the propellers of the little plane, sending the blades spinning into a blur of wood and metal. He'd brought a naggin of vodka for this eventuality, stashed in the inside pocket of his jacket. But he'd been relieved of the jacket as soon as he'd arrived by Aoife, the miller's older daughter. "It's okay," he'd said, "I'll hold on to it, it's a bit chilly," though it was late May, the day warm, the air thick with pollen and silky parachutes of dandelion seed that blew in white gusts down the avenue. Aoife, outraged at being on cloakroom duty, had manhandled the jacket off him anyway, and now he felt the missing naggin like a phantom limb. As he walked towards the kitchen, the front door opened, and the small girls came hurtling down the hall, one of them with a parasol tucked under her arm like a bayonet. He flattened himself against the wall as they went by, a battalion of miniature brides, their white sandals clattering over the tiles. A veil brushed against his arm, the scratch of gauze surprisingly rough. At the end of the miller's hall, before the glass case with the disembodied uniform, the girls veered left into the music room, and from there out to the garden to race in circles around the house, their cries rising and falling in Doppler effect. Fiona Miller was in the kitchen squeezing oranges. She was a dark-haired, tanned woman, a few years his senior. "You shouldn't have come," she said. She was using an electric juicer, feeding plump oranges in at one end, harvesting slow dribbles in a jug at the other. "You invited me." "I had to invite you, but you shouldn't have come. What were you thinking, Kevin?" She had always made him feel small. Small and red-necked and lacking in etiquette. "What about all that fucking we did?" he wanted to say. "Where was the etiquette in that?" Instead he said, "Does Bob know?" knowing very well that Bob didn't. "Don't do this to me, Kevin," she said, "because if you do, I'm warning you, you'll be sorry." She picked up 2 more oranges and flung them into the juicer. She was wearing a low-cut black dress, and he couldn't help thinking that her breasts were like 2 small oranges, and that the nipples pressing against the fabric were like little hard pips. He remembered how they used to feel in his hands, and when his eyes moved back to her face, he saw that she was watching him, watching her, and he looked away, out to the hall, where his wife was talking to one of the other mothers. She was holding several parasols, none of which belonged to their own daughter. His mother-in-law, who had paid for the outfit, thought parasols tacky. His wife glanced in his direction. It was one of the advantages of being with someone a very long time, that he could tell instantly, even at a distance, that she was angry. The juicer sputtered to a stop. "I'm out of oranges," Fiona said. "I'll get some," he said, sensing an opportunity because there was an off-license in the village. Aoife will get them. She can go on her bike. It won't take her a minute. Fiona banged on the kitchen window. Aoife was sitting on a swing in the back garden, talking on her phone. She looked up and pulled a face at her mother, but didn't budge. Her mother banged on the glass again. Aoife slid slowly, insolently off the swing and began to walk towards the house. How old is she now, he said. 16? 18 next month, which means we'll have to do this whole bloody thing all over again. Well, I won't come, he said, so you needn't worry. I'm not worried, she said, you're not invited. Aoife arrived in from the garden, slamming the back door behind her. She snatched the €10 note her mother handed her. Oranges, Fiona said, 2 nets, and make sure they're properly ripe. Aoife rolled her eyes and left. There came the sound of feet plodding down the hall, and a wet, wheezy sigh. Bob Miller was unlikely to take anyone by stealth. Beer, Kev, he said, opening the fridge, and then before Kevin could answer, I mean Coke. No thanks. Bob cracked open a can for himself. Long time no see, he said. I was only saying to Fiona this morning, when was the last time we saw Kevin? And we couldn't remember, could we, Fiona? Fiona was slapping a wet cloth, randomly, it seemed to Kevin, over kitchen surfaces. Now she went to squeeze the cloth out in the sink, at the same time running fresh water noisily into a basin. So, Bob said, what have you been getting up to? Nothing much. Anything turn up yet? Not yet. Have you tried false? A small weeping child with a grazed knee came into the kitchen. She was followed by 4 other children who formed a circle as Fiona applied ointment, none too gently, Kevin noticed, and a plaster. No sooner had the children been dispatched outside than Aoife arrived back, her cheeks flushed from the cycle, wisps of dandelion seed caught in her hair. She flung a plastic bag onto the kitchen island. These are mandarins, Fiona said, peering into the bag, but Aoife had already flounced out to the garden to resume her position on the swing. Bob winked. The joys, eh, Kev, he said, and he flopped into a chair in the corner. Fiona took the oranges, or mandarins, to the sink and began to scrub them with a wire brush as if they'd been rolling around the floor of a nuclear waste facility. She piled them into a bowl before proceeding to drop them one by one into the juicer, and the slow dribble started up again. Excuse me, Kevin said, pretending to check his phone. I need to take a call. Once in the hall, he went to the door of the living room and looked in. The woman at the drinks table still hadn't moved from her station. She was busy now. The caterers had set out trays of salads and cold meats, and everybody had come in from the garden. He considered where Aoife might have put his jacket. He'd been in this house many times, mostly times when he shouldn't have been. On the half landing, he paused to inspect the photographs. He didn't recall noticing them before, but then before his mind would have been on the curve of Fiona's hips as she climbed the stairs ahead of him. They weren't the usual snaps of seasides or birthdays, but black and white photographs of war. Biplanes rose from scorched airstrips into skies black and hellish with smoke. Hollow-eyed soldiers in steel Brodie helmets lay on their stomachs in the mud. How he envied Bob Miller. He didn't envy him the photographs, ghoulish things that already had triggered the early stirrings of nausea. Nor did he envy him his wife or his house or his job, though there'd been a time when he'd envied all of these things. No, what he envied most was Bob Miller's want of imagination, a want that saved even as it failed, that allowed Bob to make a hobby of war, to gaze with complacency upon the horror of others, happy it hadn't come for him, certain it never would. Lucky, lucky Bob, who knew so little pain that he must order it neatly packaged on eBay to hang in lacquered frames on his wall. In the spare room, the coats lay on the bed in a writhing mass of empty sleeves. Several had slid from the heap onto the carpet. He went through the ones on the bed first, lifting them, setting them aside, until halfway through he found his jacket. When he picked it up, its lightness registered with him on some subterranean animal level before the thought had even formed in his brain. The naggin was missing. He searched beneath the remainder of the coats on the bed, then started on the pile on the floor. "All right, Kev." He was holding a lady's green blazer in his hands when he turned to see Bob in the doorway. "Grand, Bob," he said. "I was just looking for my car keys." "You're not thinking of driving, Kev?" "I need to get something from the car." He floundered about mentally for something plausible. "An inhaler for my daughter." "Well then," Bob said, "we'd better find those keys." And he bent to lift a man's navy overcoat from the floor. Kevin had a sudden vision of Bob finding the naggin. "Ta, Bob," he said, "but I've already found them, actually." He patted the pocket of his jeans. They were under the valance. Bob straightened up. He looked confused. "Right," he said. Kevin realized he was still holding the blazer and tossed it quickly onto the bed. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, staring at each other, while through the open window came the shrill laughter of small girls playing tag on the Miller's driveway. "I guess we can go back downstairs," Bob said. "Okay then." "Okay." Bob gestured for Kevin to exit the room ahead of him, and when they were both outside, he pulled the door shut and took something from his pocket. There followed the excruciating sound of the key turning in the lock. The men descended the stairs together, careful not to make eye contact, neither of them speaking. When they reached the bottom, Kevin didn't stop but kept on walking, down the hall and out the front door, across the cobble-locked drive to the pavement where his wife had parked their car by the curb. He leaned against the garden wall and stared at the car. He didn't have the keys. His wife had them. These days, she was careful to keep them on her person at all times. He had a sense of somebody watching him, and knew that if he turned it would be Bob, but he didn't turn. Let him watch, he thought, because here on the street it was peaceful, the air clean and sweet smelling, the only noise the yapping of a small dog further along the avenue. In the distance, beyond the village, beyond the city, he saw fields and hills, green unpeopled expanses not yet spoiled. When he went back inside, a cake was being cut in the sunroom, a giant three-tiered confection, topped with a troop of miniature white-eyed girls in white-eyed dresses. The real girls were seated around a trestle table, protective plastic covers over their clothes. His wife was at one end of the table, passing around slices of cake and plastic cutlery, but he didn't go in. Instead, he went to the living room, where, with a heady feeling approaching joy, he found the drinks table deserted. It was a wasteland of empty bottles, wine, Pimm's, Prosecco, but in the middle of the debris was a bottle of vodka, practically untouched. In the kitchen, he poured orange juice into a glass. Through the window, he saw Aoife on the swing, her long legs dangling, the toes of her white Converse scuffing the dust. She was nothing like her father. Bob's genes had lost that particular skirmish. Instead, she was slim and dark and pretty. How he imagined Fiona must have been at that age. He watched her for a moment, then poured a second glass of juice and went out to the garden, taking the vodka and the glasses with him. The expression on her face bordered on a sneer, but she brightened when she saw the bottle. The day had remained fine, but there was something ominous in the stillness of the clouds, as if now that they had stopped moving, they might suddenly drop to earth. Aoife hopped off the swing. "This way," she said, indicating a gap in the hedge. "They don't like it when I drink." "They don't like it when I drink either," he said. When she laughed, it was her mother's laugh, uncouth with a hint of scorn, and her legs, when she settled herself beside him in the grass behind the hedge, were her mother's legs, long and tanned and small-boned. She giggled as he poured the vodka, and when she turned to smile at him, he noticed her eyes were slightly glazed. They were sitting in a wilderness of long grass and weeds, a narrow strip of no man's land between the backs of the houses and a walled public green. Dog daisies and poppies grew wild and riotous, spilling petals and seeds onto the ground. He felt the jut of her hip as she edged closer to him, and as her long hair brushed against his arm, he caught a scent of vanilla and something else, something young and girlish, like apples or berries. He drank some vodka and looked up at the sky. The clouds seemed greyer and darker and were no longer still, but moved erratically, bulging against their casing of sky. It was as if something behind them was trying to break through, pushing them forward in a thick, billowing mass, so that they blew not like clouds, but smoke. As he watched, he saw in their depths quick and sudden flashes of silver. It might have been a final rallying of sun, but it reminded him of the light glinting on the metal guns of Bob Miller's model socket camel. And as he touched a hand to her cheek, he knew the sound he heard in the distance.
I'll proceed quickly. I'm going to read just two passages from a second novel that was published back in March. I think I'll read first just what it says on the tin, which will get you an idea, a quick idea of the gist of it, and I won't have to offer then a whole lot more around the two sections I'm going to read. It's called Colors Other Than Blue. Maeve McGuire, single mother of a teenage daughter, works as a senior nurse in a Dublin home for the elderly. Grieving over her father's recent death, she begins to keep a notebook at the promptings of her sagacious counselor, Sister Una, who suggests she write down memories of her Boston childhood, along with whatever else. Reluctantly, Maeve begins to bring the past to life, recording memories of growing up in an apartment building on the Boston Common, where her Mayo-born father, James, worked as superintendent. Gradually, from her notebook entries, there emerges another more subterranean sorrow, that of the death of her emotionally complex mother, Rose, 13 years before. What's more, Maeve also confronts a handful of other home truths therein regarding love's single motherhood and the demanding, and at times comic, challenges of her nursing day job. So that's blurb, and that's blurb speak. One of the earlier drafts described Maeve as a collapsed Catholic. The point being that it was not, the fact that she ended up getting counseling from a nun was not a straightforward process. Sister Una herself was a counselor. She had taught literature at university level and that, but that's just the way it went. I'm going to read two short extracts from it before we go over to questions from you. So it's basically a notebook, but it begins with an afterword. she hasn't, Maeve has not written in it now for several months. So the first section I'm going to read you just a couple of pages of. She's come back to it after 2 or 3 months for the first time. So we begin with afterword. I thought I was done with this note, yes, and the final thing is this, I'm not up to this level of ventriloquism, so you need to imagine a 38-year-old woman's voice with this, okay? Whether I was up to the level of ventriloquism in order to write it, you can also judge for yourselves, but I'm not going to sound like Maeve, I can tell you that straight off. So thank you for, if you can do that for me. I thought I was done with this notebook 2 months ago, until last night's dream of my mother and that crow. Only this time, Ma actually managed to stitch its belly up, using that thick, waxy thread you get for mending carpets. And it's that dream has brought me back to this notebook one last time. Here I sit in my Dublin kitchen, a woman of 38, still dreaming of her mother, still working the shuttle of memory back and forth across the big pond, as Pops always called it, from Ireland to Boston where the story begins, and back and forth and back again. It's Christmas next week, and I've the tree up already. A surprise for Katie when she gets home from secondary school, after which we'll trim it together, as we always do. I just strung the lights this afternoon to see which bulbs had given up the ghost of Christmas past. It gets dark early now, so I drew the sitting room curtains before plugging